So with the success of the Michael movie, it's safe to say that with what the ending showed, we are in fact getting a part 2 to the film. Many fans are excited for the movie and have high hopes for it to even outdo the first film. But there's one thing that has been circulating around the fan community lately: the casting of Michael for the second film. Obviously, it's a no-brainer that Michael will once again be played by Fabio Jackson. We've already seen behind-the-scenes photos and makeup tests of him portraying Michael during later eras, including the Dangerous era, and from both a storytelling and production standpoint, it would make absolutely no sense to suddenly replace the lead actor midway through the franchise. The audience has already become familiar with Jafar in the role, and regardless of people's opinions on the film itself, one thing most viewers agreed on was that he captured Michael's mannerisms, energy, movement, and presence surprisingly well. Continuity matters in a biopic series, especially one this massive. Well, apparently, to some fans, that wouldn't be the right choice because a portion of the fanbase believes someone else should play Michael in the sequel. And who do they think should take over the role? Why, of course, Fabio Jackson. Yes, we're talking about him again today. And once again, people online, some jokingly and others seemingly completely serious, are pushing the idea that Fabio should somehow replace Jafar in the sequel simply because he resembles Michael physically. Now let's be honest for a second. Looking like Michael Jackson and actually portraying Michael Jackson are two completely different things. A biopic, especially one at this scale, is not a TikTok skit, Instagram reel, or cosplay performance. It requires acting range, emotional depth, screen presence, choreography, vocal performance, dramatic timing, and the ability to carry entire emotional scenes. And let's be honest, Fabio lacks in many of those departments. Michael's life was layered, emotional, complicated, and at times deeply tragic. Playing him requires far more than simply having similar facial features or posing in photographs recreating iconic outfits. That's where a lot of this discussion starts to fall apart. Many people pushing Fabio into the conversation are doing so almost entirely based on appearance alone. And while yes, Fabio resembles Michael visually to an extent in certain photos and videos, resemblance alone has never been enough to lead a major Hollywood production, especially not a film connected directly to the Jackson estate and backed by a major studio. Studios are not going to recast the lead actor of a successful billion-dollar level franchise because social media users think a lookalike would be cool. And honestly, some of this conversation feels less like genuine criticism and more like internet culture doing what it always does, turning everything into a meme discussion. Because when you actually step back and think about it logically, why would the filmmaker spend years training, casting, and building Jafar up as Michael only to suddenly replace him right when the story is reaching some of Michael's most iconic eras? That would completely break immersion for audiences. Another thing many people overlook is that Jafar has something that cannot really be taught: a natural familial connection to Michael. There are certain expressions, movements, smiles, and subtleties that come naturally because he literally grew up around that legacy. Whether people want to admit it or not, that authenticity adds something to the performance. It gives the role a sense of emotional realism that audiences can feel. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with Fabio being a successful lookalike or entertainer in his own lane. But there's a major difference between being a Michael Jackson impersonator or influencer and being the lead actor in one of the biggest music biopics ever made. Those are entirely different worlds. Fans sometimes blur that line because social media makes appearance the most important factor, when filmmaking is far more complex than that. What's also ironic is that many of the same people demanding accuracy from the biopic are the same ones suggesting a complete actor replacement halfway through the story. If anything, keeping Jafar consistent throughout both films is the most accurate and professional decision possible from a filmmaking standpoint. Imagine watching the continuation of Michael's life story and suddenly the main character is played by an entirely different person just because the internet wanted someone who looked more like certain late-era photos. It simply wouldn't work. Recasting Michael midway through the story would make very little sense for several major reasons, both from a filmmaking perspective and from a business perspective. First and foremost, continuity. Audiences have already spent an entire film becoming familiar with Fabio Jackson as Michael. His voice, body language, facial expressions, dancing style, and emotional portrayal have already been established as this version of Michael Jackson. Suddenly replacing him in the sequel would immediately break immersion for many viewers because they would spend part of the movie mentally adjusting to a completely different face and performance style instead of focusing on the story itself. It would be especially strange because this is not a superhero reboot or a reimagining years later. This is supposed to be a direct continuation of the same story. Part 2 likely begins shortly after the events of the first film ended. So in universe, only a short amount of time has passed, yet Michael would suddenly look and behave like a different person entirely. That would feel jarring to audiences. Another reason recasting would make no sense is because the production clearly planned ahead from the beginning. We already know Jafar filmed or at least tested looks from later eras of Michael's life, including the Dangerous era. That means the filmmakers were never treating this as a one-movie-only casting situation. They cast someone they believed could evolve through multiple stages of Michael's life. Replacing him now would basically throw away years of preparation, makeup testing, choreography training, and audience investment. There's also the emotional and marketing side of things. One of the biggest selling points of the film has been the fact that Michael is being portrayed by his real-life nephew. That alone generated massive media attention and emotional curiosity from fans worldwide. The studio and the estate heavily marketed the idea of a Jackson family member carrying Michael's legacy on screen. Removing that connection in the sequel would weaken one of the film's most unique aspects. Then there's the issue of performance consistency. A biopic is not only about resemblance. It's about maintaining the same emotional interpretation of a real person throughout the story. If you suddenly insert another actor, especially someone with a different acting background or experience level, the tone of the character can completely change. Michael could suddenly feel like a different person emotionally, not just visually. That risks damaging the emotional investment audiences already built in the first movie. And realistically, Hollywood almost never recasts a lead actor in the middle of a successful film series unless there is a major problem behind the scenes, such as scheduling conflicts, controversy, health issues, contract disputes, or a creative reboot. None of those appear to exist here. The film was successful, Jafar's performance was one of the most talked about parts of the movie, and the estate clearly supports him. So from a studio perspective, there would be no logical reason to suddenly start over. As for the Fabio Jackson discussion specifically, most of that conversation seems driven almost entirely by physical resemblance rather than storytelling logic. But again, films are not cast solely on resemblance. If they were, every impersonator would automatically become a Hollywood actor. Playing Michael Jackson across emotionally heavy periods of his life requires acting ability, stamina, dramatic presence, dance precision, and the ability to carry an entire major-budget film. That's a very different responsibility from recreating looks or mannerisms online. At the end of the day, recasting Michael for Part 2 would create more problems than benefits. It would confuse audiences, disrupt continuity, weaken the emotional connection established in the first film, and undermine the entire purpose of building Jafar up as the face of the franchise in the first place. Studios behind massive productions like Michael are extremely careful about public image, controversy, and overall marketability when it comes to casting decisions, especially for a film connected to someone as globally recognizable and heavily scrutinized as Michael Jackson. One thing major studios try to avoid is bringing unnecessary controversy into a project that is already under a microscope. The Michael biopic was already guaranteed to face intense media attention, criticism, debate, and online discourse no matter who was cast. Because of that, the safest route from the beginning was always going to be someone closely tied to the Jackson family and estate, which is part of why Jafar Jackson made sense to them. With Fabio Jackson, the issue is that internet controversy tends to follow him fairly often online, whether it involves accusations of exploiting Michael's image, questionable fan interactions, impersonation discourse, social media behavior, or debates surrounding authenticity. Even if some of those controversies are exaggerated or overblown by the internet, studios generally avoid casting choices that could instantly create distracting headlines before filming even begins. And that's an important distinction. Studios do not just cast based on talent or resemblance. They cast based on risk assessment. They ask questions like, will this person bring positive attention or negative attention? Could this become a PR headache midway through promotion? Will journalists focus on the film itself or on controversies surrounding the actor? Does this casting decision help the credibility of the project or damage it? When you're dealing with a multimillion-dollar biopic tied to one of the most famous entertainers in history, those questions matter enormously. Another thing people overlook is that the estate itself would likely want someone they trust personally and professionally representing Michael on screen. Jafar already had that built-in trust factor simply by being family and by reportedly working closely with the production from the beginning. Bringing in someone controversial from internet fan culture could potentially make the project feel less prestigious or more like stunt casting. There's also the professionalism aspect. Major film productions require years of contracts, media training, international press tours, choreography rehearsals, emotional dramatic acting, and maintaining a stable public image throughout the entire promotional cycle. Studios usually prefer actors they believe can handle all of that without creating unpredictable distractions online. At the end of the day, fans are going to debate everything surrounding this film, especially because Michael Jackson remains one of the most discussed and scrutinized entertainers in history. But realistically speaking, the chances of anyone besides Jafar playing Michael in Part 2 are almost non-existent. The foundation has already been laid, audiences already associate him with the role, and the production clearly planned ahead for the later eras. So while the Fabio Jackson discussions may continue online for memes, debates, and fan-casting conversations, the reality is that Part 2 will almost certainly continue with Jafar leading the role, exactly as intended from the beginning. Or it's just simply people trolling to get an angering reaction from fans when they know Fabio isn't fit for the role anyways, despite what his fanbase wants to say. So now I want to hear from you. Are you excited for Part 2 of the Michael Jackson biopic? Do you think Fabio should play Michael, or is the returning of Jafar perfect as is? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm Mr. Escape, and I'll catch you later.